It started with his hand raised in the air, like a promise. Third period was rolling along on rails. Slides, dates, a clipped voice racing a bell. He waited for the small nod that releases a question into the room. It didn't come. He held the hand there anyway, and felt the familiar ache in the shoulder that comes from keeping yourself visible. Finally, without permission, he spoke. He wasn't loud. He wasn't rude. He was exact, the way his grandmother taught him to be when something matters. You skip the part where the law lets certain people own the map and call it history. He said, and how that still shows up in who gets watched in the hall. The room did that tilt it does when a truth enters the air without an invitation. A boy in the back pretended to cough and smirked. A girl shot him a warning glance that meant, don't do it. The teacher's smile thinned to a line. That's not what we're discussing, she said, not unkindly, but with a finality sharpened by years of getting through a lesson. He held his ground, curious, not combative. It seems like it is. The sentence that followed has an undertow. The way some adults can turn a child's question into an offense without raising a voice. You people are always making it about race, she said, and the words didn't drop, they detonated. The quiet at the edges of the room broke. A chair scraped. Someone drew in breath and held it as if oxygen had become political. His hand fell to his desk without his permission. His throat tightened. She pointed to the door. Office, now. The referral slip would call it defiance. The district would call it unbecoming conduct. The state licensing board would later call it a pattern. By the time the bell rang, a classroom conversation had become a career ending, and a boy with a question had become the subject of a lesson none of them would. Forget. He was a questioner by temperament and training. His mother taught him to ask why as a form of self-respect. His grandmother taught him to ask who benefits as a form of survival. Their apartment, cramped and filled with books second-hand and sacred, made a home out of inquiry. Morning. Light found the table where he did homework and scribbled poems in the margins of worksheets. Evenings hummed with the soft percussion of pot lids and radio news, his mother's voice finishing sentences the anchors left open. On Sundays, the elder at church who led youth group liked to say, God gave you a brain and a spine on purpose, tapping the top of his head and the center of his back with 2 fingers. He learned early how to inhabit both. The neighborhood was a classroom that never closed. Barbershops offered editorials better than any op-ed page. Corner stores ran economies based on trust and tabs. They lived in a zip code known for talent. And headlines for block parties that fed 3 generations and for sirens that taught children to count before sleep. His bus stop carried its own curriculum. How to stand your ground without inviting harm. How to read a face. How to measure the angle of a glance. He grew fluent in adult euphemism and child honesty, listening for the place where they overlapped and made a usable truth. School was a mosaic. There were teachers who demanded his best and gave theirs, who wrote comments in the margins of his essays that pushed him and never once used the word articulate, like a trophy. There were teachers who made space for histories that weren't in the district binder. There were also those who equated obedience with learning, who saw his height before they heard his voice, who translated curiosity as threat. He kept a binder, blue and scuffed, with tabs for each subject and a pocket. For receipts, notes on what had been said when, copies of emails, the small paper trail of a child making sense of institutions. He loved books so much he treated the library like a second home. The librarian who recommended novels where boys like him got to be complicated and alive. The quiet aisles that offered refuge when the cafeteria roared. He joined debate team to learn timing, not to crush opponents. He joined the poetry club to learn how words carry pain without dropping it on other people's feet. He was not a saint. He sometimes joked too loudly, sometimes missed the point and made a point anyway. He apologized when he learned how. Mostly he studied how rooms work and who they work for. The racial climate didn't announce itself with a single storm. It was weather, the casual we don't see color in a hallway where patterns drew themselves in ink every day. The eye roll when a student mentioned a name that made adults tense. The extra passes in gym away from him when teens were captained by boys, unused to seeing him as strategist, not just strength. He had already been told in 8th grade that he was too passionate after a discussion on Reconstruction. He had already been asked in 9th if he could perhaps take it down a notch. He started to notice which questions earned nods and which earned office visits. He wore his hair in a twist style his grandma called royal, and learned to live with strangers' fingers hovering, with the joke about a lot going on up there. He wore a hoodie on cold days and learned to remove it at a teacher's raised eyebrow before the request arrived. He mastered a smile that kept adults calm without surrendering his integrity. Through it all, he held on to the belief that asking precise questions is the opposite of disrespect, that inquiry is what keeps a country honest. And the classroom human dot the lesson was titled Modern Movements, a unit that promised to connect past to present. The slide on the projector featured a tidy line of milestones, laws passed, speeches made, photographs arranged, as if progress were alphabetical. He had spent the previous night reading a profile of a local organizer who had been arrested at 16 for refusing to sit down when a teacher glossed over the same era. He wrote in his notebook, "Ask, whose progress?" When the teacher presented a paragraph that treated a landmark court decision like a finish line, his hand went up. "Ms. L, can we talk about what happened after the decision? The way the district stalled? The way our neighborhood school got less of the new funding?" The teacher froze, not at the content, but at the interruption. "We'll take questions at the end," she said, voice thin with the tension that comes from keeping a lesson on time. He waited. She moved to the next slide. He raised his hand again. The textbook says protest simmered, but that's a weird verb. People were marching because nothing changed. A sigh elsewhere. The teacher's mouth twitched into a polite line. "This is not a debate club. We have to move on." He felt his chest tighten. He wasn't trying to perform. He was trying to understand the rules for telling the truth in public. But the slide makes it sound like everyone was happy. That's not accurate. And then she said the sentence that would leave the room and live elsewhere. "You people are always making it about race," she said, and even she looked surprised to hear herself say it. 3 words did more work than any policy. You people. He felt the floor change under his feet, the way a gym floor does when you step on a dead spot. The kid behind him whispered a curse. The girl by the window shut her eyes. The room exhaled. In a single, soft "oh" that barely made a sound and still shook the walls. He kept his voice level because that's what his mother's breathing exercises had trained him to do. It is about race. It was then. It is now. That's literally what the unit is. The teacher pointed to the door, the universal gesture that substitutes discipline for dialogue. "Office, now, and leave your notebook." He tucked his notebook under his arm anyway and carried it out as if he were ferrying a witness to safety. In the hall, posters about respect watched him walk. The secretary had already pulled a referral slip from the pad. Under reason, the teacher had scrawled, "Disruptive." Talking back. Under description, she'd added, "Aggressive tone." He stared at the paper as if it were written in a language that wanted to be English, but kept getting the verbs wrong. He sat in the plastic chair outside the assistant principal's office and tried not to rehearse a defense. He wanted to scream and thank and sleep and leave. The assistant principal arrived with a face like a mask of concern. "We can't interrupt instruction," she began. He asked, "Do we write down when instruction interrupts the truth?" She blinked. "Are you being smart?" He heard the double meaning and chose the kinder path. "I'm trying to be." The rest moved quickly, because adults move quickly when they think control is slipping. He was assigned a one-day suspension pending a parent meeting. He returned to class to gather his bag and felt 30 eyes do the math they are never taught, but always asked to solve. Who is safe? Who is loud? Who is right? Who is punished? He kept his spine tall, heard his grandmother's backbone first, and left. By lunchtime, the sentence had made it to 3 group chats and 2 teacher text threads. Phones hummed in pockets across the building. A friend in math class typed, "We heard." Another wrote, "We got you." The teacher in the next room, who had been a first year when his brother was a senior, sent a message to his mother, "I'm here. I saw. I will show up." The meeting the next day felt like theater with real stakes. Ms. L sat at one end of a conference table, hands folded. Over a stack of papers, eyes rimmed red from a night of bad sleep. The assistant principal sat in the middle, posture neutral, pen poised. His mother sat at the other end, voice steady, folder thick with emails and policies. He sat beside her, notebook on the table like a witness. The teacher apologized before. The meeting began, a small, rushed sorry that tried to outrun the word choice. "I didn't mean," she started. His mother lifted a hand gently. "Our son asked a question. Your response named him as a category. Intent matters. Impact matters. More." The assistant principal outlined steps. An investigation, interviews, a letter in a week. His mother asked for the process in writing, with timelines. He watched the assistant principal's pen hover over action and land on suspension. Reduced to 1 day. Teacher placed on leave pending investigation. Ms. L inhaled sharply. He looked at her and saw not a villain, but a person who had learned a set of instincts that no longer served the room. He felt compassion flicker and didn't fan it. He let it sit beside accountability. That evening, he wrote his statement, precise and spare. He recounted the exchange without adjectives. He wrote what he heard, what he felt, what he wanted to learn that day and couldn't. He asked for 3 things: a real reckoning with the curriculum's gaps, training for staff on identity-based, harm, a student council where questions like his could be part of the lesson plan, not grounds for removal. The video appeared 2 days later, shaky, grainy, captured on a classmate's phone. It showed only the sentence and the silence that followed. The classmate hadn't planned on sharing it. She sent it to him first, asking permission. He asked her to send it to the principal instead. It made its way anyway, to parents, to a community group, to a local reporter. He did not retweet. He did not go live. He went to school and sat in the library and did his work. The district moved, as districts do, at 2 speeds, outwardly slow, inwardly fast. The superintendent issued a statement with the shape of contrition. The union called for due process. Teachers texted privately with hearts and prayers. Students printed flyers that said, "Questions belong here," and taped them to lockers until custodians were told to take them down. Then they taped them back up. Suspension felt like the longest day in a short life. He stayed home, wrote 3 pages of a poem that refused to rhyme, and folded laundry with his mother in a quiet that was not defeat but strategy. The phone rang and rang friends, elders, a local organizer offering to sit in on meetings. He said yes to the organizer, yes to the teacher ally, no to the television interview. He ate dinner at the table where hard things had always been softened by soup and presents. His grandmother came over with a story about a principal she'd once outlasted and a prayer. She said worked best over hot tea. When he returned to school, the atmosphere had rearranged itself. Some kids stared like he'd been on TV. Some whispered. His name like a spell that could both protect and endanger. A few avoided him, not out of malice, but out of fear that his gravity would bend their day. He made himself smaller in the hall and larger in the library. The librarian left a stack of books on a table with a sticky note, "For the unit you deserve." He met with a counselor who knew the difference between "Are you okay?" and "What do you need?" He asked for a plan that didn't isolate him further. No exile to study hall during history. No new seat that screamed punishment disguised as safety. He asked to transfer to a different section for that course, and asked that the work done in his old section be repaired for those who remained. The counselor listened as if she'd trained for this exact hour. Some adults are ready when the moment arrives. He gathered 5 friends and started a lunchtime circle in an empty classroom with a teacher who volunteered keys and a kettle. They called it office hours, a joke that made them feel both seen and in charge. The rules were simple: speak from your life, listen with your shoulders, not just your ears, no recording, no call-outs without call-ins. They drafted a list of questions teachers could use when a discussion charged the air. Who are we leaving out? What does this word mean in your body? If we slow down, what gets better? They slipped the list into 3 mailboxes and taped it to 3 doors. By the following week, 15 students were sitting cross-legged on tiled floors, trading stories like currency and learning how to let silence do some of the teaching. The investigation unfolded. Students were interviewed. Emails were read. A pattern emerged a decade long, not of slurs, but of small cuts the raised eyebrow when certain kids raised hands, the word aggressive appearing in notes more often beside certain names, choice to shut down certain lines of inquiry. Ms. L had been a teacher who, in her best moments, made reluctant readers finish paperbacks and reluctant speakers recite paragraphs. She had also been a teacher whose instincts matched an era that claimed neutrality as a virtue while standing on uneven ground. The interviewers asked her to account for "you people." She cried. She apologized again. She said she was tired. The report wrote down the apology and the pattern. He kept going. He wrote an op-ed for the student paper titled "How to Ask a Question in Public," and it read like a manual. How to ground a question in a text. How to avoid turning a class into a trial. How to handle a "not now" without giving yourself away. How to persist. He wasn't interested in martyrdom. He was interested in skill. He joined his mother and the organizer at a school board meeting, where he spoke for exactly 2 minutes and still made the room lean forward. He didn't repeat the sentence. He repeated the ask. Curriculum review. Training. A student advisory group. He held his head high and didn't perform gratitude when the board thanked him for his courage. A word adults use when they want to be generous without being specific. He started sleeping again. Not all nights. Enough. He took long walks around the track and counted breaths. He studied for chemistry because life refuses to pause the periodic table for your moral education. He laughed with friends when laughter didn't feel like betrayal. He forgave in small, private ways that didn't make the news. The hearing before the school board drew a crowd whose faces he recognized from grocery aisles and Sunday pews. Some came to support Ms. L. Some came to support him. Most came because they loved children enough to endure fluorescent lighting and agendas that ran long. The district's council read the findings in a voice that made facts sound heavy. The union representative spoke of due process and a career's worth of service. Ms. L, hair pulled back, voice quiet, read a statement that didn't defend, didn't excuse, didn't do the thing people do when they are drowning and grab anything. I said something that revealed a blind spot so large it hurt someone I was supposed to protect. I am sorry. I don't ask to be kept. I ask that you do better for the next student. He didn't speak. He had spoke enough. The board did something that felt both inevitable and surprising. They voted to terminate for cause. Not because of a single sentence, though the sentence mattered. Because of a pattern paired with an unwillingness to learn when it counted. The vote wasn't unanimous. The hesitation reflected the complexity of ending a person's career. The result reflected the complexity of trusting students to be safe. The case didn't end at the board. The matter, as a matter of routine, went to the state licensing body. There, in a smaller room with fewer cameras and a thick packet of policies, the question became not employment, but license. The board reviewed the file, the context, the past evaluations, the recent trainings attended or not attended, the letters written on both sides. He did not go to that hearing. His mother did. She listened to adults debate standards and terms, and she remembered his hand in the air and the way it trembled when he lowered it. The board suspended Ms. L.'s license indefinitely with conditions for reinstatement that on paper might read like hope. In practice, it ended her career in that district and likely beyond. He didn't cheer. He sat with a strange grief that comes when someone who hurt you loses something they loved. He allowed himself the satisfaction of not being gaslit. He allowed himself the relief of knowing a door had closed that had hurt others before him and might have hurt others after. He allowed himself the complicated truth that accountability sometimes looks like ending a job, and that this is both necessary and tragic. The district moved next, the way institutions sometimes do when they are forced to evolve on a deadline. They convened a curriculum committee that didn't just rearrange chapters but asked, what are we training students to ignore? They contracted trainers who didn't treat bias like a virus you could cure with a slideshow, but like a habit. You have to unlearn with practice. They created a student advisory council with real remit and a staff liaison who answered emails. They published a timeline for the changes and assigned names to deadlines so the dates meant something. The rest of the year unfolded with adjustments that would have seemed small if you weren't counting. A 10th grade English class added a unit called Whose Story, Whose Frame, where students revised textbook passages to reflect complexity. A 9th grade civics teacher tried a practice called Stop, Notice. Name whenever a topic pressed on a bruise. They stopped and named the pressure, noticed what the room did in response, and returned with wider eyes. An assistant principal started asking teachers, what will you do when? In pre-observation meetings, not to trap them, but to make a plan for the minute before the mistake. The office hours circle outgrew its classroom. They moved to the library, then to the auditorium stage after school, sitting in a half circle under lights that flickered. Teachers came and listened from the back row, learning more in an hour than 1,000 memos could have taught them. He shared the stage with other students, then stepped aside entirely so new voices could learn to hold a room. The club's poster changed. Questions belong here became questions build here. He wrote an essay for graduation that he had no plan to deliver. He kept it as a gift to himself. Part thanks, part ledger, part map. He included a paragraph for Ms. L, not as absolution, but as a trace of the truth that people are not there. Worst sentence. He applied to colleges and chose one where the first email from a professor did not say, "We are excited to hear your perspective, but what questions are you working on?" He left and came back and left again. He began to speak at other schools, not as a cautionary tale, but as a coach. He was paid. He asked for student stipends. He insisted on follow-up, not just a one-off assembly dot at home. Life remained gloriously ordinary. He did the dishes without being asked half the time. He took his little sister for ice cream and let her pick the flavor. He didn't like because older brothers learned diplomacy early. He read books that had nothing to do with school reform. Sci-fi that stretched his sense of possibility. Mysteries that satisfied his craving for a tidy ending in a world that rarely offers one. He jogged at dusk and let the day leave his body. Ms. Left the district. Rumors said she moved, that she took a job that did not put her in front of children as authority. He did not Google her quarterly to see if the story had sprouted new wings. He let the ending be an ending. He focused on what kept going, the unit that changed, the training that deepened, the habit of asking, what did we skip? When a topic made the room fidget. He measured success the way his grandmother measured spice, by feel, by improvement, by people asking for seconds. He authored a slim guide with a teacher ally called Make the Room Bigger, filled with prompts, lesson arcs, and a chapter titled When You Want to Say You People. It was not a bestseller. It found the people it needed to find. A professor put it on a syllabus. A principal kept it on a desk. A student kept it in a backpack and, one day, slid it across a teacher's desk with a sticky note. Can we try page 42? A boy asked a question in class and learned what rooms do when they feel threatened by truth. A teacher answered with a sentence that showed the scaffolding of her instincts, and it cost her a career. Between those two hands, a raised hand. A pointing finger stretched the work of a whole community to decide what a classroom is for. This story is not a parable about villains and saints. It is a ledger of choices, to speak precisely, to listen with courage, to map harm accurately, to remedy it with something more than words, to build practices you can reach for when the moment arrives. If you are a student with a sentence burning a hole in your pocket, know this: your voice is not a violation. Learn timing, learn grounding, learn to tie your question to the text, the moment, but do not swallow yourself to keep grown-ups comfortable. Keep your receipts. Find allies who prove themselves with actions, not emojis. Practice with friends so you can practice in rooms that matter. If you are a teacher or administrator, you hold a door in one hand and a mirror in the other. Make room for discomfort that teaches instead of discomfort that punishes. Build a plan for the minute after the mistake. Ask for help sooner than pride wants you to. Let students be your colleagues in designing something better. Schools are made of habits. We can change them. One raised hand at a time. One teacher who learns out loud. One policy that puts repair where punishment used to sit. One library table that becomes a lab for a different kind of future. The bell will still ring. The day will still end. But if we do this well, the next period will start with a room that knows how to breathe when the truth arrives.